All right, it's 3:30. We're going to go ahead and begin. This is a bonus week of AP Computer Science A content review sessions presented by Advanced Kentucky. My name is Aaron Timmons. I'm the Advanced Kentucky Mathematics Content Director, joined by Dr. Sherry McGuffin, who's our STEM coordinator, as well as Monique Rice, who is the Senior Content Director for Computer Science and Mathematics, and our presenter for today, Mr. Rob Schultz from Bellbrook High School. So before we get started, just going to go over a couple housekeeping items here. This review session is intended for Kentucky students. However, I realize there may be teacher students from elsewhere, so welcome. We'll do all we can to make this an equitable opportunity to learn. During the session, we encourage participation, but any participant causing a disruption will be removed. Contact information for Advanced Kentucky, Monique, and Sherry are all on the screen here. Feel free to reach out to us with an email, give us a follow on Twitter, Facebook, if you have any questions after today. Your microphones will remain off for the entire session, as well as videos. Please leave those off for the entire meeting. If you have a question, please use that chat button in the lower right-hand corner. You can chat directly with Sherry, Monique, or myself, and we will be asking Rob questions as they arise. So teachers, students, any questions are welcome. So please feel free to put those into the chat box. KYAP2020.com is where you can find today's recording afterwards, as well as all previous recordings for Computer Science A, as well as any other AP, Math, Science, or English course you may be taking. So check out that website here. Again, today's video will be posted by the end of the day. And that is all for mine. So I'm now going to turn things over to Mr. Schultz. You may recognize him from the AP Live videos. But Rob, go ahead and give yourself an introduction. Let us know a little bit about yourself, and then take it away.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. My name is Rob Schultz. I'm going to jump ahead here a little bit. Right now, let's see, kind of looking down through the agenda, there we go, the introducing myself part. As Aaron said, my name is Rob Schultz. I teach at Bellbrook High School in Bellbrook, Ohio. I've been teaching there for 20 years, teaching math and computer science. This is my 19th year teaching AP Computer Science A. I've been involved with the AP reading since 2008, and in the years since, let's see, I started as a reader. I've participated as a table leader. I've been a question leader. This year, I'm going to be, for the first time, a distributed question leader, because this is the first year that the AP Computer Science A rating is going to be 100% distributed. There will be none of us in Kansas City, which is going to be a little strange. I've been involved with College Board as a consultant since 2017, and Aaron, correct me if I'm wrong. I think I started working with Advanced Kentucky back in 2018. That was the first year that I came down and did a couple of content review sessions at that point. So so it's good to be back virtually in Kentucky and working with all of you. Do me a favor if you would, just so I know kind of the population or the audience that I'm talking to. Just real quick in the chat, or I don't know if you guys have the ability to like raise your hand or do something like that, but if you are a student, indicate so in the chat, and then if you're a teacher, also indicate, so that I know whether I'm talking to students or teachers or both. That'll help me out a little bit.
So, okay, there we go. Coming in on the chat, or you can use the buttons right underneath the participant screen, either one.
Okay. Now, while you're typing, I'm going to go ahead and kind of go on and tell you a little bit about what we're going to talk about today. The first things that I want to kind of go through. Okay, so I'm seeing 2 hands up, so I'm assuming we have 2 students.
And I think, and someone's replied directly that they're a teacher.
Oh, okay. All right. So we've got a little bit of a mix of both. Okay, that'll work great. So first thing I want to start off with, and hopefully this is information you've seen before, but I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit. I want to talk specifically about things that students need to do before the exam, and then what to expect on exam day. This is kind of, well, it's not kind of, it's an extremely unprecedented year, and the exam is going to be different than it's ever been in the past. Students are able to take the exam from home. They can take it on virtually any device that connects to the internet, and the testing environment is different than anything the students have worked with in the past. So because it's a time test and the test has a specific starting time, the students don't want to get into the testing environment and find out that, they aren't comfortable with it, or, they don't want to burn minutes in there trying to figure things out that they could have figured out ahead of time. So we'll talk about some of that. We'll talk about just general information about what we know about the questions, and then I'll get into some of the information about the mock exam that I put together for all of you. So we'll talk about the questions. We'll go through the rubrics and some virtual samples, or I guess some hypothetical samples of different things that students might do, and we'll kind of work from there. So, like I said, hopefully this part about things to do before the exam and what to expect on exam day, hopefully you've seen this before. But again, I'm going to kind of break it down a little bit. So maybe there are some things in here that you didn't quite pick up on the first time, and we'll kind of work from there. All right. For starters, it's important for students to know that this year you will need an exam, an e-ticket to take the test. So you're going to receive your e-ticket by email 2 days before each test. So if you're taking multiple tests, you will get multiple e-tickets. You'll get a unique ticket for each exam that you're registered for. And if by some chance you're not getting emails from College Board, don't worry. I mean, you should have gotten some. In fact, we'll talk here in a minute about the fact that you should have gotten a confirmation email on Monday, the 4th. If by some chance, I think Monday was the 4th. Yeah. If by some chance you didn't get that confirmation email, don't panic. I'm going to talk you through going out and checking your email address, but you'll also be able to get this e-ticket to take your exam. It'll be available on myap.collegeboard.org. So we'll talk about all that here in a second. The important part of this is that each e-ticket is personalized for you for a specific exam, and it's not transferable. So if a friend calls up panicked a half hour before the exam and says, hey, I can't find my e-ticket, can you share mine? You absolutely cannot share that e-ticket with anyone, because then they will be logging in as you, and you will lose your chance to take the test. So do not share your e-tickets. The one thing you do want to do, though, in regard to your e-ticket, is make sure that you save the email in case you need to request a makeup exam. And we'll talk about the procedure for doing that in a second as well. The email will look something like this. It'll have this little e-ticket that'll have your AP ID number. It'll tell you the subject and the date and your local equivalent time to Eastern Standard Time, and it'll have a button, and that's the button that you're going to want to click 30 minutes before you go to take the exam. Okay. The e-ticket that you receive will be valid only for the May exam schedule. And I copied these slides I copied these exactly from the information that College Board released to all teachers. So don't get confused down here when it says things like, if you can't test on one of these dates. They were talking collectively to all of these different groups. Our date is very specifically May 15th. That is our one date in May that we can take our exam. That's the AP Computer Science A day. And it's scheduled during this time slot. So if you live in the Central Time Zone, your exam is 3 p.m. sharp. And if you're in the Eastern Time Zone, it's 4 p.m. sharp. Unless there's a significant conflict, you should test in May, so you have June dates as a backup. Okay, there are only 2 test dates for AP Computer Science A, May 15th, and then we'll talk about the June date here in a second. But you want to make sure that you're testing on that May date, so that if something goes wrong, you lose your internet connection or something to that effect, you can fall back on the June date. Okay, if you bypass the May date and you choose to take it in June, and then you have some kind of an issue, then there is no backup. And we'll talk about that again in a second here. If by some chance you have an absolute conflict that you absolutely can't take the exam on the May 15th date, just don't use your e-ticket. Just let the email sit, don't get rid of it, but don't click the button, because if you don't use it, College Board will detect that and they'll automatically send you an updated e-ticket for the makeup testing date in June. Okay, so if by some chance something happens that you won't be able to take it in May, May 15th absolutely won't work. Just hold the ticket, don't use it, and you'll automatically get an updated ticket for June. Okay, for the June makeup dates. Okay, let's see, they've got this little reminder up at the top. If you have a conflict, don't use your May ticket. You'll automatically receive a June e-ticket for that exam. The June date is June 3rd, and the time's a little different. If you're in Central Time, it's 1 p.m. Eastern Time is 2 p.m. And we're going to talk a little more about the timing and what to expect on test day in a second. But again, don't get confused down here where they say things about, June dates, plural. We have one June date, singular. Okay, we have one shot, and that's June 3rd. So again, the recommendation is plan on taking the test in May, so that if there's a problem, you have this as a backup. Okay, don't plan on this being your one shot, because then if there's a problem, there won't be one. If by some chance on the May exam you have any kind of a disruption, your internet goes out, um, your power goes out, your laptop dies, your little brother spills chocolate milk on your keyboard in the middle of the exam. I mean, whatever it would happen to be, you can request an e-ticket for the June makeup date for any of those types of disruptions. So again, we'll talk a little further on about the things that count as a disruption and the things that don't. Okay, but keep in mind that that's a possibility. As far as the exam schedule, everyone in the world is going to be taking the exam during this exact same hour time slot. So we're lucky that for us, it's Central Time Zone 3 o'clock, Eastern Time Zone 4 o'clock. We've had students through the AP Live lessons we've been doing that have communicated with us from China, Kazakhstan, India, South Korea. They are going to be taking this exam at the exact same time you are at, but for them it'll be 3 o'clock in the morning or 4 o'clock in the morning. So make sure that you are setting alarms on your phone. I've told my own students, I'm in Eastern time, I told my students set one alarm for 3 o'clock that says log in half hour. Set a second alarm for 3:30 that says log in now, because one of the things we're going to talk about here soon, you need to log in and start signing in about a half hour before the exam time. Okay, but be aware of your time zone and be aware of what time the exam is. Make sure that you've got reminders for yourself so that you don't forget, because the exam is going to take place at that time, whether you are signed in or not. Okay. Let's see, we've covered all that already. So when you go to take the exam questions are going to pop up on a web browser like Chrome. The one browser that College Board has said absolutely will not work is Internet Explorer. So if you use Internet Explorer as your primary browser, you're going to want to download Chrome or Firefox or something else. So as you're viewing the question in the web browser, you're going to need a separate window if you choose to type your responses, because you have to type or write your responses outside of that browser. And then you have 3 different options to submit your response. You can either copy and paste a typed response. And I'm going to be honest with you, for me personally, that's what I'm recommending to my students. Because they all have access to laptops and computers at home. They can all type into an IDE or Microsoft Word, something like that. And then from a timing standpoint, that's really the quickest, to Control C, go over and click in the window and click Control V and hit the submit button. You can also attach a typed response. So you can type something in JGrasp or into an IDE. You can copy paste it into a Google Doc, and then you can attach and upload the Google Doc. And then if you are working with your phone, the other option would be to handwrite all of your responses and then attach photos, 1 photo per page, and we'll talk about the details of this in a second. But you can upload a photo of a handwritten response. So there are different options that College Board has put in place for you, and we're going to talk about those 3 specific options. Okay, the copy paste option. You would type your response in a separate window. So they've kind of modeled it over here to the side. You would have one window that has the question. You would have another window where you're going to type all of your work. And when you are finished and you're ready to submit your answer, you would copy paste everything from here into the little testing window and click the submit button. They tell us that you're allowed to type your response in Google Docs, Microsoft Word, Notes, or a similar application. And for us, that means an IDE. So if you're comfortable with Dr. Java or JGrasp or Eclipse, or whatever you might use, you are welcome to type your code in those compilers. The one thing I would caution you on is you're going to get just one small piece of the puzzle. And it's kind of going to be similar to what we did for the mock exam. You're going to get a description of a class, and you're going to be asked to write just one method. Without the rest of the class, your code won't compile. So from a compiling standpoint, there's no benefit to doing it in a browser or to doing it, your answer in an IDE. What will be beneficial to you, though, in the IDE is that all of the auto formatting will automatically take place. So if your IDE is set up to automatically indent within brackets, all of that will happen automatically, and that could save you some time. Okay. We'll talk about this here in just a second. Make sure that you type your AP ID and your initials at the top of the response. So one of the things we'll talk about as far as preparing ahead of time is making sure that you have your documents set so that when it's time to start the exam, you click a pre-prepped document and open it, and it already has your AP ID and your initials at the top. Because again, this is a time test. You'll have 25 minutes to submit your answer, and when the timer has 5 minutes remaining, that's when it's time to stop. And because time is very limited, you don't want to burn time during that 25 minutes, doing all of these things that could have been done ahead of time, that you're not required to do during the exam time. As far as exam day setup, what College Board is recommending, if you have a laptop or a computer with a screen big enough to support this, would be to have two separate windows side by side, because one of them will have the question with a little timer at the bottom. The other one will be the window where you type your work. And so best case scenario would be that you have both of these open at the same time so that you can work while you're looking at the question and while you're looking at the timer. Okay, so that's optimal. If you don't have the means to set up that setup exactly, don't panic. Everything will still be fine. It just means you're going to have to do some jumping between windows and maybe scrolling around a little bit. Okay. The second option would be to type and attach a document. And this one will work fine, but again, now you've got a little bit of extra time involved to do the attaching and saving and things like that. So again, you can type your response in Google Docs, Word, Notes, or an IDE. If your IDE saves, which I'm assuming it would, a .java file, that's not one of the accepted file formats. So you're going to have to copy paste from the IDE into one of these specific applications and then save your document as either a doc, docx, PDF, TXT, or ODT file. Again, you want to make sure you have your ID and your initials at the top of the response. And again, when the timer hits 5 minutes, I mean, that's kind of the signal. And you'll hear me say that several times as we're talking through some of this stuff. 5 minutes is kind of the magic time slot that you want to make sure that you're stopping and moving things on to upload things where they need to be. Our exam has 2 questions, which means that if you're going to choose to attach documents, then you have to create, save, and attach and submit 2 separate documents, one for each question. So again, what I've told my own personal students to do, if they're going to use the IDE or if they're going to use Microsoft Word, to go out ahead of time and create 2 documents in JGrasp or in Microsoft Word, so that they have both of them preset, and on exam day when it's time to work, all they have to do is double click the one that says question 1. It opens up, everything's already there prepped, and all they have to do is start typing their code. And again, the exam day setup, kind of the same idea, side by side windows, and again, they've kind of modeled that over here in the picture. If by some chance your situation is that you don't have access to a laptop or a desktop and you're going to be using your phone, that's perfectly fine. Okay, it just means that you're going to handwrite your code on paper, which is the way the questions have always been done in the past. They've already been always been handwritten. Make sure that you write your AP ID and your initials and the page number at the top of each page. And I think there's one coming up here in a slide that that I borrowed from College Board to make sure that we can kind of see what the example that would look like. But you want to make sure that you clearly write your response in dark pen or pencil. Okay, this is not the time to use gel pens or pink pens or things like that. Make sure you're using a dark pen or pencil. Same time with the time, 5 minutes. The difference is that with this, you're going to be taking pictures with your phone, and you're only allowed 1 page per photo. So if you're handwriting your work, we've got 2 separate questions. You are allowed 5 photos per question. Okay, so that means that ahead of time, you're going to need to get 10 pieces of paper, take 5 of them and prep them for question 1, 5 pieces of paper and prep them for question 2, and each page needs to say your 8-digit ID, your initials, question 1, page 1, question 1, page 2, question 1, page 3, to make sure that everything is prepped so that you're not spending time writing those the day of the exam during the exam. Okay. Let's see, I'm trying to think of anything else in here. Exam day setup, just make sure that your smartphone or tablet, you're going to display the test question, display the timer. Let's see, you'll use your phone to take photos of the written work, and then you're going to use your phone to attach and submit the photos of the written work. So we'll talk a little more about how all this goes. I'm going to kind of walk you through a 5-step process that College Board has recommended to all students taking this. And part of this will be testing some of this to make sure that you're comfortable with it when we get to that point. Okay, if by some chance you're going to be testing with accommodations, if you were already pre-approved with accommodations, you don't need to submit any further requests. If you have an accommodation that allows for extended time, for example, it'll automatically show up on the timer. So when you get into the test, if you're allowed double time, then the timer will start with the allotted amount of time that you need. Okay, if you have access or if you've been approved for screen reader software, that you just make sure that it will work with Chrome, Firefox, Safari, or Microsoft Edge, again, because Internet Explorer can't be used for this test. So make sure you're doing some testing ahead of time. If you've been approved for a reader or a scribe, then a reader, a family member, or a household member is welcome to assist you by reading or scribing. But just a reminder that the reader or scribe is only allowed to write what you tell them to write. They can't offer any input, and they're not allowed to help you in any way. And College Board even added this extra little piece. If by some chance, you fall off of a ladder hanging a picture the day before the exam, or whatever, trip down the stairs and you sprain your wrist, whatever, and you can't write, you can go to cb.org/AP 2020 accommodations, and they will work with you to come up with temporary accommodations for a temporary medical condition, or a physical condition like a sprained wrist or a broken arm or something like that you might need help with writing or things. So don't panic if something like that happens ahead of time. What College Board has recommended in that situation is try and get a hold of your AP testing coordinator from your school first, but then you also have access to this website if you need some guidance and assistance in that situation. So I'm going to keep moving things along here. But if you have questions, feel free to chat, put them in the chat room, and then feel free to interrupt me if you receive any questions from students or from teachers for me. So College Board has asked that all students follow these 5 steps to take before exam day, and we're going to break each one of these down a little bit piece by piece. The first one is reviewing your contact information. So especially knowing that you were supposed to receive a confirmation email on May 4th, if you didn't receive that email, what probably is going on is the email address that you registered with your College Board account is your school email. And I know in our district, our school emails are locked down so that students can only receive email internally. So any outside mail coming in, even if we were still at school, even if we weren't at home, that mail would be blocked and students wouldn't receive it. So what you need to do is go out to myap.collegeboard.org, click your profile in the top right-hand corner and go to account settings, and then confirm your email address is your home personal email address that can currently receive mail. Make sure you do update in subscriptions. Confirm that you've checked the box that you want to receive updates from College Board. And it's really not even a bad idea to go into your address book. There should be a place somewhere in your email or address book where you can specify a safe sender list and specify that College Board at e.collegeboard.org does not go to your spam mail, that anything that comes in will go to your inbox. Now, again, don't panic. I had a couple extra things circled there. Don't panic if by some chance you still aren't getting emails from AP, because that e-ticket that you need on exam day, it'll also be posted in your My AP account. So you can go to myap.collegeboard.org on exam day, and that e-ticket should be there. In fact, it should be there 2 days in advance of your exam. Our exam is the 15th, so people should start noticing that e-ticket showing up on the 13th. The second thing the College Board wants you to do is check your device. Make sure you check your tech. Figure out which of those 3 options you're going to use, whether you want to use desktop, laptop, tablet, phone, whatever. Make sure that you've tested it. Make sure that any, like if you're going to use the IDE, make sure that it's there. They specify that you won't need the lockdown browser on your device, but if you have the Grammarly plugin on your computer, you'll need to remove it to take the test. Okay, so Grammarly, and I think that's across all applications. I mean, all exams, not just ours. Most of this stuff in the middle applies to some other topics, but ours is considered one of these other subjects. Using a smartphone, like I said, it's possible. They've designed it so that you can use your phone to take this test. The only thing is it's going to cost you not necessarily time, but it's going to be a little frustrating because you're going to have to kind of scroll back and forth because the screen is only so big and you can only fit so much on the screen at one time. So like I said, if you have the means, if you have a desktop or laptop, that would probably be my first choice. But if you don't panic. You can still take this test on your phone and you'll be perfectly fine. Okay. Also, that kind of goes along with checking your tech is preparing your documents for typing. And like I said, you have some options, but you don't want to burn that test time in trying to go through and get your phone prepped or getting your documents prepped for the test. So you don't want to waste that test time by putting your initials and everything at the top. Make sure you decide whether you're going to be using Google Docs if you're typing. Make sure you decide whether you're using Google Docs, Word, Notes, or an IDE. If you're using something like Word or Notes or even the IDE, make sure you turn on the autosave. If you're using something like Google Docs and you want to do the attachment piece as opposed to the copy paste, just remember you're going to have to download it first. So make sure you download it as a PDF or a docx. And then make sure you go out and you prep all of your documents ahead of time. And we've already talked about that a little bit. Make sure that you have the files already kind of preset so that you're not burning time on test day. We will have 2 questions, like I said, so you're going to need to create and save 2 documents per exam and name them clearly so you know you're attaching the right one at the right time. So my recommendation to my own students was, if they're using Microsoft Word, for example, create 2 documents on their desktop, not in some folder buried somewhere where they have to find them, and call them AP Computer Science A question 1.docx, AP Computer Science A question 2.docx, so that the day of the exam, when the question pops up, they can double click on the question that they want to complete, type their answer in, everything will be preset with everything they need as far as the header information, and they're good to go. Okay. If you're planning on handwriting, again, use white paper, lined or unlined. Make sure you use paper that's standard size, 8.5 by 11, or at least close to it. Use a number 2 pencil or pen with blue or black ink. Like I said, no gel pens on this one. And then make sure, again, you're prepping 10 pieces of paper, 5 for question 1, 5 for question 2. Before test day, make sure you prepare them by putting your AP ID, your initials, and your page number at the top of each page. So, AP Computer Science A question 1, page 2, and so on and so on. Like I said, you'll be allowed up to 5 pages per question. You probably won't need 5 pages per question, would be my guess. I know question 1 is going to be in 3 parts. It'll have a part A, a part B, and then an open-ended question. And question 2 will be 2 parts, a part A and an open-ended question. And my guess is that at most you'll need 1 piece of paper per part. So part A, you might need up to 3 pieces of paper, and part B, you might need up to 2 pieces of paper. But better to be over-prepared than under-prepared. So I would still plan on having all 5 pages for each question set and ready to go. All right. Let's see. Okay, here's the third one, and this is the big one. This is the one I've been pushing my students on the most. The testing environment for this exam is going to be significantly different than anything any student for AP Computer Science A has ever dealt with before. And College Board has created a site that you can go out and you can practice. It was actually open prior to May 4th, but because we're after May 4th, it doesn't really matter. If you go to cb.org/AP demo, it's going to bring up a test environment that's exactly the same as the exam environment that you'll take the exam in on May 15th. It's going to allow you to practice all of the different ways to submit your responses. You can log in as many times as you want. I've been telling my students to go out and work with it for 15 minutes every day. Pick something that you can copy paste or attach or upload or take pictures from your phone. Try all of the different options for how you can submit and figure out the one that works best for you. The most important reason to do this is if you have a plan for how you're going to take this exam, and then you go out and try it in this testing environment, in this AP demo, and it doesn't work. If you can't connect to it from the device that you're going to be using, then you won't be able to connect on exam day. Okay, so that means that you're going to need to come up with a new plan or update your browser or fix something, and then keep trying until you actually get in. But again, it's going to be important that you test this, because I can't stress this enough. It's a limited time test, and College Board has said that saying that you didn't have time or you ran out of time is not going to be sufficient to get a retake option. So it's going to be important that you're not burning time during the exam and trying to figure out, well, how do I do this, or how do I attach, or how do I upload? You want to make sure that you test that so it's very fluid on test day. Okay, so that's probably the biggest word of advice. The most important thing I can tell you today is make sure you go out and familiarize yourself with the test environment before test day. Okay, test day is not the day to do that. Okay, all of that should be done before test day. All right, as far as what you're going to need on exam day, obviously, you're going to need your e-ticket email. You're going to need a completed exam day checklist, which we're going to talk about in a second. Obviously, you'll need a device and a browser and internet access. If you have been approved for assistive technology, for example, a screen reader, make sure that that's tested and ready to go. If you're going to type your responses, you're going to need some application that you can type them in. But then you're also permitted to use class notes, study guides. You can use textbooks. You can use classroom resources. You can use previous assignments or assessments. The word of warning I'll give there, and again, I know I keep coming back to this issue that it's a time test, but it's a time test. Okay, so if you spend 10 minutes because you know that a month ago your teacher gave you an assignment that was very, very similar to the question that's being asked, and you know that you remember how to do this certain thing, but you spend 10 minutes going back looking for that assignment, well, now you have 15 minutes to work instead of 25 minutes to work. So even though this is permitted, it's kind of a quicksand thing. Once you start looking, you don't want to get stuck in quicksand and lose time on the test. Okay, you want to, if you've got notes that you want to have available, have them out handy. The Java quick reference is one that you're going to want to have handy, but don't kind of go down the rabbit hole where you start looking for things and you realize that you've just spent half of your testing time looking for an answer to a question. As far as our specific test things that you're allowed the Java Quick Reference Sheet, and I put a copy of the Java Quick Reference Sheet as well as some other documents that might be helpful out in the folder for this content review session. So you can find the Java Quick Reference there. It's also available on my AP. You're also permitted an interactive development environment. So again, make sure you go back to the testing environment and you test using the IDE that you like or using Microsoft Word. My recommendation is strictly my recommendation. When I went out and played with it, it's what I liked best for me, but you might have something that works totally different for you that you like better, okay? Let's see, where else do we need to go? Advice about optional resources. Like I said, time is going to be short. Internet searches specifically. A couple people have posted in the online teacher community, my students want to know if they can look things up on the internet. Well, yes, they can. But keep in mind, the people that write these questions have written them in such a way that there is nothing on the internet that's going to be of any help to you. So anytime you spend on the internet looking up answers is going to be nothing but a waste of your time. The more time you spend searching the web, the less time you spend answering exam questions. There's nothing out there that's fact-based. You won't see a question that says, what's the definition of an array list? So there's nothing out there that would really be beneficial. And the concern would be if you see code and then just forget that it's an exam and you copy paste. Any copying from websites, social media, online forums is considered plagiarism. It'll be detected and your scores will be canceled. College Board is taking security very, 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 very seriously for this exam. They are not going to mess around at all. So anything that triggers them to think that you copied something from a website is not going to end well. So my personal advice, stay off the internet. Once you have the tabs open that you want, for the question and whatever you're typing in, if you're going to have multiple tabs, keep those up, leave them up, don't go beyond those, okay? Let's see, part 5, let's see, of this 5 steps. Make sure you look for your confirmation and an exam confirmation and an e-ticket email. You should have received the exam confirmation on May 4th, and I believe it had a copy of your 8-digit AP ID with it. And then just make sure that you look for your e-ticket 2 days before the exam. And again, if you don't get it, make sure that you go out to My AP, because My AP is where you're going to be able to find your e-ticket if it doesn't come in email form. And then the last thing I've got as far as what to do ahead of time is complete the AP exam day checklist. All 5 of these steps in detail are covered in this checklist that College Board has provided for students to make sure that they have done everything they need to do to prep for this thing ahead of time. So you can download that checklist at cb.org/AP checklist. I also put a copy of it out in the shared folder for this content review session. Probably the most important thing out there is going to be to make sure that you fill in your 8-character AP ID. And in the past, that's always been on a little sticker that you got maybe the day of the exam that you stuck to your exam book. I understand from a couple of teachers, and I haven't verified this, so I hope I'm not sharing incorrect information, but I've heard from a couple of teachers that students can go out today and get that AP ID code off of their My AP page, that it's actually there, that students can have access to it. That's something that's new. That's never been there before. So you might be able to get that AP ID now. It should have been part of the confirmation email that you got, and it'll definitely be on your e-ticket. So make sure that you fill this out so that you've got it and you can reference it, and you've got all of your ducks in a row, everything's set before you actually start to take this exam. So, okay, so that's the things that you need to do before the exam. Those are the things that need to get done ahead of time so you're not burning time. Any questions from anybody at this point?
None have come through.
Okay, I'm going to keep cruising along. So what to expect on exam day? All right. I know I've said it several times, but I'm going to say it again. This is a timed test. And my students, I was kind of surprised. I thought I had kind of hammered that home to them, that this was a timed test, that they needed to be in by 4 o'clock, that the test started at 4 o'clock. And the last time we sat down and talked about some of this, there were still a couple that were under the impression that the time started when they finally got logged in. If they got logged in at 4:10, then their time for question 1 started at 4:10, and that is not the case. This exam starts at 4 o'clock Eastern time, 3 o'clock Central time, whether you are there or not. And if you don't sign in until 10 minutes after that time, then that's 10 minutes that you've lost. So what College Board is asking students to do 30 minutes before your local start time. So Central time, this would be 2:30, and Eastern time, it would be 3:30. Sign in. That's when you click the button on your e-ticket to check in. There'll be some security questions they ask just to verify that you are who you say you are, and that you are not Uncle Bob who is a computer engineer for somebody. They're going to ask you to check in. And best case scenario, that check-in process takes 10 minutes, and then you spend the next 20 minutes watching a countdown timer count down until the exam starts. Worst case would be that you check in, there's some kind of a problem, it takes a couple minutes to get sorted out, but you still have plenty of time to get all of that sorted out and get checked in before the exam starts. Once the exam starts, the question one will automatically appear after this 30-minute check-in time. Question one will automatically appear, and I'm not crazy about the way College Board kind of represented it on here, because it almost looks like this is 4 different time blocks. This is actually 2 separate time blocks. About to cough here, sorry. This is actually 2 separate time blocks. One of them, the timer will start and it'll say 30 minutes, not 25. But that's when question one will appear on the screen, and you'll have 30 minutes, but the timer is going to count down, and when the timer hits 5, it'll go from black to red. And when the timer turns red, that's your signal to stop working. Okay, there is not going to be anybody there proctoring the exam that's going to tell you to stop working, but when the timer turns red, that's when you stop, because you've had 25 minutes. You now have 5 minutes to submit your response, and you want to make sure that you've got plenty of time to copy paste or attach or take pictures or whatever it is you need to do. If you decide to kind of play it like one of those thriller movies, like one of the movies where the timer is counting down and you've got to figure out which wire to cut, you want to try and take it right down to the wire, then you're risking not being able to hit that submit button on time. And if you don't hit the submit button on time, your answer doesn't go through. And like I said, College Board has said that running out of time or losing track of time or not managing your time wisely, that's not a sufficient reason to request a retake in June. Okay, that doesn't count as a disruption. So make sure at 5 minutes when the timer turns red, that's when you stop, regardless of whether you're done with the question or not. Make sure that you go ahead and upload your answers at that point. Okay, once the timer has counted all the way down from 30, so it'll start at 30, when we get to 5 minutes, it'll turn red when it hits 0. By then, you should have submitted your answer to question 1. It'll automatically shift over to question 2, and the timer will reset to 20 minutes. So you'll have 15 minutes for question 2, and then the timer will turn red at 5 minutes, and that's when you need to submit your response. Okay. Oh, yeah, I had little arrows to kind of accent all those, but I forgot. Okay, so for your testing environment on test day, make sure to do your best to test by yourself in a quiet room. You don't want disruptions, obviously. So make sure that you remove all distractions. Don't have music playing in the background. Don't play in the same room, or don't test in the same room that the TV is playing. Enable the do not disturb setting on your phone or on your tablet, on your laptop, whatever it is you're using. Let your family know and your friends know that you're going to be testing during that hour block so that they don't disturb you. Make sure your device is plugged in. Make sure your phone is charged. If you're using your phone, make sure your laptop is charged. If you have limited bandwidth, make sure that the others that use your network limit their use of the internet during that time. That's not the time for your family to, I like their examples here. It's not the time to play Fortnite or stream movies on Netflix, okay? You wanna have all of that bandwidth available so that you don't have lags in the question, okay? So make sure that your family knows that you're taking an important test at that point. So for that hour, the internet belongs to you. Okay, and then have your checklist and all of the required documents next to you, and those include your notes. It includes the quick reference sheet. Obviously, the checklist, it mentions that. Make sure all of that's handy. From a security standpoint, I mentioned that College Board is being very, very, very strict with security this year because this is an at-home test, okay? They are being very specific when they say that you may not incorporate work of any kind under any circumstances for any reason which is not your own, and you may not provide or receive aid of any kind from anyone. Now, the exception to that would be if you've been approved for accommodations and you have a scribe, okay, the scribe is allowed to write down what you tell them, but that doesn't really count as receiving aid. They're talking about receiving aid in answering the actual questions, okay? So make sure that this is your own work, your best work, and that you are the one providing the answers to this. Students found violating exam security will face severe consequences, which can include having their names reported to college admissions offices for attempted cheating, okay? If you're planning on these scores being reported to the schools that you're interested in, pardon me, the last thing you want is for those college admissions offices to get an update from College Board saying that you attempted to cheat on this exam. That would not look favorably on your college application. So please make sure that you are turning in only your work. The other thing, obviously, is that your AP exam scores would be canceled. So not only would you not get a score, but the admissions offices for the schools that you were interested in would receive a very non-favorable reference from College Board on your behalf, okay? If you want more information about exam security, make sure, let's see, unfortunately they didn't include the link and I can't click the link, but I'm sure if you go to the AP Central, go to the Corona updates link, I'm sure there's information there on exam security that you can get to, all right? When you check in for your exam, you're going to need to spend a few minutes passing through some various security filters to confirm your identity. That's why they want you to do it 30 minutes early. A timer will show how much time remains until the start of the exam, and then once that timer runs down, the first exam question will automatically appear. So once the exam starts, don't refresh your screen, don't hit the back button, anything like that. I feel like I'm going to have another little coughing fit. Sorry. As far as answering the exam questions, make sure that regardless of whether you're typing or whether you're handwriting, make sure that you're breaking the question apart. If it's like our question one that has 3 parts, it looks like this is for maybe American history or something. But make sure that you actually denote which part of your answer goes with each part of your question. Again, they've kind of modeled up here. They've got the ID and their initials at the top. You are welcome to use a spell check and grammar check. I'm assuming that they put that in for other disciplines, because a spell check and a grammar check would do absolutely no benefit to us as programmers. You can print the test questions if you want and highlight certain things, but again, limited time. So the more time you spend running to the printer and getting the highlighter and highlighting things. So just be aware of your time if you choose to do that. Make sure that you're being careful. And then you're not going to be able to move on to the second question until the full 30 minutes for the first question runs out. So use that full 30 minutes. Make sure that you take the time to go back and check your work. You know, if you get done with the question 10 minutes early, don't think, well, I can submit and then get a head start on question 2. You're just going to end up sitting and watching the timer count down because everybody moves on to question 2 at the same time. So make sure that you take the optimum amount of time that you can to look at question 1 before you go into question 2. Once you submit a question, you can't go back to it. So once you hit that submit button for question 1 is done and we're moving on, okay? Make sure you manage your time. I'm going to kind of pick up the speed a little bit. I just realized that we've got about 20-ish minutes left. 5 minutes before time is up, like I said, the timer will turn red. It does go on to say that you can still earn a 5 even if you don't finish a response. So if you get to the end of a question and you run out of time, don't panic, okay? Upload what you've got. It's better to be sure that you've submitted what you have than to try and finish and then come in after that submit button and not get anything submitted, okay? And College Board has assured teachers and has assured students that there are enough points distributed between the questions that even if you don't finish both questions, it's still possible to earn a 5 on this thing. So don't panic if you don't have it completely finished. Just stop when it's at the 5-minute mark and submit. Okay. Like I said, losing track of time and not submitting a response before time runs out is not an acceptable reason for requesting makeup testing. Okay. Let's see, we've already talked about submitting your response. So I'm going to kind of move forward a little bit just to make sure that we've got time to get some other things in. I want to make sure that we get to the mock exam. The one thing I am going to throw in here as far as submitting your response, when you submit the response to question A, especially if you have low bandwidth, it's going to continue to transfer. I'm going to jump up to this one. It's going to continue to transfer. That's fine. It'll transfer in the background. They've designed the system so that you can still go on and start question 2. Question 2 will pop up on the screen and you can start working on it while question 1 is still streaming and transferring. So that'll work okay. If you have low bandwidth, don't worry. Once you've finished, If your response continues to transfer, wait for an on-screen message that confirms that it's complete, okay? Make sure that you don't turn off your computer or restart your computer or close your browser until that message pops up. If you wait and wait and wait and you never see that your AP exam is complete message, then go to cb.org/request makeup, explain the situation, explain that something happened, that it was never confirmed. It could be that it went through and you just never got the confirmation message back, but if something happened that it didn't make it through, then that would be when you can request a makeup, okay? And as far as things that could go wrong, if you accidentally close the browser, if your device crashes, if you lose internet access, like I said, if you have some kind of an issue where a family member disrupts, then those are things that you can do to request a makeup exam. The one thing that College Board has asked that you not do is don't call customer service centers if you don't finish, or if there's some kind of an issue, because the customer service centers won't be open due to the pandemic. So if you lost too much time due to a technical problem, if you aren't able to connect, whatever, then you can request a makeup by going to cb.org/request makeup. Okay, so that's all of the information I've got as far as what you need to do ahead of the exam, what you need to do on exam day. Hopefully that information was helpful to you. Okay, now let's talk a little bit about the mock exam and the questions. Pardon me, I'm not sure why I'm getting a little cough, but okay, so the two questions, I'm going to kind of go through them quick. We know that one of them will be arrays and array lists. It'll count as 65% of your score. It'll be about 25 minutes. Well, it'll be 25 minutes with 5 minutes of upload time. And then it'll go into question 2, which is going to be a methods and control structures question. And that one counts as 35% of your score with 15 minutes. Each of those questions includes an open-ended question at the end. And that's the wild card here, because we have no idea how the open-ended question is going to be scored. Up until May 1st, on May 1st, a rough draft, not really a rough draft, but a draft of sample questions, including the open-ended questions, were released to teachers on the online teacher community. And then those questions were made available to everyone, public, including students, on May 4th. So I'll walk you through in a minute or two how to get to those, and we'll talk about those. But before we get to that, let's talk about the mock exam questions. Like I said, I know time's short, so I'm going to kind of fast forward through a couple of things here. I had planned on kind of breaking the questions down. I guess the main things I wanted to focus on for this one is, one of the things they show us for question 1 is they give us declarations from multiple classes. Okay, and in this case, they give us the declaration for a time class that includes a minutes until method, but they don't show us any implementation. And that's kind of a red flag. Anytime you're taking a free response question, if you see a class that includes methods, but it says implementation not shown, that's an immediate kind of hint that that method, or those methods, if there are more than one, are going to be part of your solution somewhere. So in this one, they tell us that we have this time class that contains a time, and we have this method that will tell us the minutes until the first time, from the first time until the second time, and they give us some examples of that. Then they give us the declaration for a flight class, and again, they tell us implementation not shown, so that means that we know we're going to be using those in there somewhere. We have one method that gives us the departure time of a flight, one that gives us the arrival time of a flight, and notice the return type of those is the time class. So that means that any of these that I get, I can call that minutes until method to find differences in time between them. And then the third thing they give us is they give us the declaration of a trip class, and the trip class contains an array list of flights. So this is what makes it our array list question. We have an array list of flights, of flight objects, and we've got 2 different methods we need to look at. We've got a get duration method, and we have a get shortest layover method. All right, and I want to focus on, let's get to get duration first. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the canonical solution, the kind of what's considered to be the optimal solution by the chief reader during this particular year. I'll show you the adjusted rubric that I put together, and I'll explain why I adjusted it, and then I'll show you a couple of hypothetical student solutions. My original plan was to include actual student responses, so we could discuss some things that the students did on this one, but unfortunately there were no actual student responses to the mock exam this year for AP Computer Science A. So the sample student selections I'm going to give you are going to be hypothetical, okay? The one thing I did want to point out with this one is that it's important for students to make sure you read these comments that go with the method too, because there are some extra little puzzle pieces in here that you need. Like, for example, this one says that we're supposed to return in this method an int that contains the number of minutes from the departure of the first flight to the arrival of the last flight. Makes sense. We want to know the total duration of our trip. If there are one or more flights in the trip, but it also says we're supposed to return 0 if there are no flights in the trip. So we need to make sure that we catch that little nugget of information right there and account for that. So here is our canonical solution. Okay, this is the one that if you go out to the 2008 free response questions on the AP exam page, this is the canonical solution that goes with this specific question. I had to modify the rubric a little bit for this one. And the reason I modified the rubric was back in 2008, AP exams, at least AP Computer Science A exams, were scored with half points. And that's not a practice that's used anymore. And I wanted the rubric that I used for this to be more in line with the way exams are actually scored today. So I combined some half points here and there, which probably makes my rubric a little more rigid, I guess, than the rubric from originally in 2008. But we still end up with the same 4 points. So the first point in the modified Schultz rubric for this question is that it checks to see if flights is empty and it returns 0. And in this case, the canonical solution checks to see if flights.size equals 0 and we return 0. It also checks we access flights.get0 and we correctly call get departure time. So that's point number 2. We have to go to the first flight in our trip and we have to get the departure time of that flight. The third point is that we go to the last flight in our trip, flights.size -1. We get that flight and we get its arrival time. So we find out what time our last flight lands. And then the last point would be returning the correct duration using minutes until. Okay, so those are the 4 points. Like I said, the original rubric was still 4 points, but there were some half points thrown in. You know, a half point for checking flights is empty and a half a point for returning 0 and some things like that. So this just kind of consolidated some things to modernize it a little. Now, here is the first hypothetical student sample student solution. Okay, so I want to make sure that we take a look at this again with the same rubric. And in this case, the only mistake that the student made was that they just missed this little piece of information where we have to return 0 if there are no flights in the trip. So unfortunately, we can't give this student the first point because they never check for that. They don't check to see if the flight's empty. They do everything else beautifully. They get the first flight, they get the departure time, they get the last flight and the arrival time, and then they check to make sure that they return the minutes from start to end. Okay, they get a correct duration using minutes until. So this would be 3 out of 4 points. Then I have this hypothetical. Okay, with this one, the student goes through and they check if flights is empty and they return 0. But the other thing that it's pretty common to see is trying to take everything and fit it in one line of code. And in this case, in doing that, the hypothetical student accidentally missed some things. I mean, they got the first flight in our trip, but they forgot to call get departure time. So the student was thinking that they're getting the minutes until the first flight, or they're calling minutes until for the first flight, but they didn't actually get the departure time. And because flights.get0 would return a flight, not a time, it makes minutes until invalid. But for the first point, accessing flights.get0 and correctly calling get departure time, they would not get that point. They also have a couple of mistakes with the second point. We have to call flights.get flights.size -1. Well, in this case, the student forgot the -1. So this would actually cause an index out of bounds exception. Remember, if we have 5 flights, they're numbered 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, by trying to get flights.size, I'm trying to get the flight at position 5 because that's my size and there is no flight at position 5. So, and then the second mistake they made is they forgot to call get arrival time. So even though there are 2 little minor goofs in there, it still only counts as 1 point because both of those goofs kind of fall under this one point on the rubric. And then because they're calling minutes until on flights and not times, unfortunately, we wouldn't be able to award this point for calling minutes until and getting the correct duration. So by trying to pack everything into this one line, it actually cost this student 3 points. Okay, now it is possible to do all this in one line, but it's a lot of code to type in one line, and it's easy to get tripped up in there when you've got that much to kind of sort through. The solution to do it in one line would actually look like this. I can call flights, I can get 0, I can get the departure time. Once I've got the departure time, I can call minutes until, and then in the parameter, I would have to do flights.get flights.size -1 get arrival time. So it's doable, but it's a very big bite, right? I mean, it's a lot to try and take in and do in one shot. Okay. Let's see, we're down to 5 minutes. Aaron, am I okay if I go over by about 5 or 10 minutes? I've got
No
more here
problem.
than I thought I would. No problem? Okay, I'm gonna keep cruising on. Any questions yet from anybody? Because that's the important part. I wanna make sure I'm answering questions that anybody might have.
You have questions, feel free to send them to Sherry, Monique, or myself.
Okay, I'm going to keep cruising. So for part B, we were supposed to write the get shortest layover method, and they described that a layover is the number of minutes from the arrival of one flight to the departure of the flight immediately after it. So in this example, we have 4 flights. Our first flight arrives at 12:15, and the next flight departs at 1:15, so we would have a 60-minute layover. Flight 1 arrives at 3:45, flight 2 departs at 4 o'clock, so between those two, we have a 15-minute layover. Again, this is where that, reading the question ahead of time, or reading the question before you start to work, I should say, is important. It gives us another one of those little nuggets of important information up here. If there are 2 or more flights in the trip, the method should return the shortest layover of the trip, in this case 15, but otherwise it should return -1. So that tells us we have to put some kind of a check in to make sure that there are 2 or more flights. And if we don't, we automatically return -1. So looking at the canonical for this one, again, we've got our little modified Schultz rubric over here. We check to see if flights.size is less than 2, and we return -1. That's our very first step, and that gets us our first point. The second point is that we access all of the elements of flights with no bounds errors. So in this case, we start at 0, we go up to flights.size -1, and we make sure that we get the flight at position I and position I plus 1. So when I equals 0, we'll get the first one. When I is at size -2, we'll get the last 2 flights in the trip. So we're making sure that we account for every flight there and we're accessing all of them. Do we compare the layover time between successive flights using minutes until? We do. We get the arrival time, we get the departure time of 2 successive flights. We store the value from using minutes until to layover, and then we do a comparison of layover so that we make sure that we're actually getting the comparison in. We correctly identify the shortest layover. If our layover that we're looking at is less than the shortest one we have recorded, then it becomes the new shortest one we have recorded. And the last point would be just for returning the shortest layover. Okay, so there's the canonical laid out with the modified rubric. And then we can look at our hypothetical sample student solutions. So take a couple seconds and look at this one. So again, first mistake was with this one was just not reading the question fully and not knowing that we need to check to see if flights.size is less than 2. So there is no check in there for that, so we can't get the first point. And then beyond that, this student, again, followed the rubric almost exactly. And the only thing, again, they forgot, and this is just kind of a being in a hurry type thing, you'd be surprised how many times we have a method that has a return type that the student forgets to actually return it at the bottom. I know it's easy for you as students to get so focused on the algorithm and making sure that everything does what it's supposed to, that you forget that, okay, now that I've got an answer, I have to do something with it. Well, we have to make sure that we return it because, again, we have an int return type. So before you submit, just check your methods and make sure you have a return to match whatever the return type is. Okay, so in this case, the student would have got 3 out of the 5 points. With this one, we do the check to see if flights.size is less than 2, and we return -1. But then we have a small problem with the loop. We have to make sure that we access all of the elements of flights with no bounds errors. Well, one of the things that I find in my own class is that we spend so much time learning to traverse strings and arrays and array lists that we kind of get into this habit of going from 0 up to length or 0 up to size. And we forget that sometimes we don't necessarily want to go all the way to the end, or maybe we don't want to start at 0. Maybe we want to start halfway through and work to the end. So sometimes muscle memory just kind of takes over and we complete the for loop without thinking about where we're trying to get to. Well, in this case, the user plugged in, I've got a little typo in there that I didn't catch. In this case, the user plugged in flights.size instead of flights.size -1. And as a result, when we get down to here, by the time I get to the last flight in the trip, it's going to throw an index out of bounds exception because this is going to try and grab a flight that doesn't exist. So we can't get the second point for accessing all of the elements with no bounds errors. We do compare layover time between successive flights using minutes until. We correctly identify the shortest layover, and we have a return statement. So in this case, just that one error would cost just 1 point. So we still get 4 out of 5 points, which is still a very good score. The point I wanted to make with this is I just wanted to kind of point out some of the the things that I would find common, or I would anticipate common mistakes from my own students, or maybe that I would expect to see if this were an actual question at the reading, to kind of give you a little insight so that you know things to look for, or things that you might want to go back and double check when you're done, just to make sure that you didn't kind of fall into one of these little traps. Okay. I had planned on going through and spending some time looking at question 2, but I want to make sure we've got time to talk about this open-ended question at the end, because again, that's kind of the wild card for this thing.
Hey, Rob, can
Yes.
you hear me?
Yeah.
A student asked, why are we initializing shortest using the get duration method?
Why are we in, let me go back up to that. Oh, that's a good question. So I think it said somewhere in the problem, I would have to go back and double check the problem, but we want to find, let's see, the shortest layover. Wow, now I have to think about that a second. So if I call get duration, it's going to give me the maximum length of time that I would have for my trip. Okay, because we're trying to find shortest, I want to find something. I want to find the smallest value that I've got. So I know that my shortest layover has to be less than whatever the time would be from the time I start the trip to the time I end the trip. There are a lot of ways that we could initialize. That is a great question, by the way. There are a lot of ways we could initialize shortest. I know that I've had students in the past that love using integer.max max value. The only thing I would be careful about is make sure that you try and initialize it to a value that makes sense for the problem. If we use integer.max value, it's going to be 2.7 something billion, and we can assume that our shortest layover is going to be less than that. But anytime we deal with a problem where we're looking for the minimum of something or the maximum of something, I caution my students about making sure that they're initializing it with a value that makes sense. If I'm looking at an array of integers, for example, and I'm supposed to find the maximum value, I don't know that I would necessarily assume that it's going to be 0 or whatever. I always tell my students to pick whatever the first value in the array is, so that I know that if they're looking for like a minimum, they know that it has to be that value or something in the array that's less with it. I think the intent with this one, the reason they did that with the canonical, is they knew that the shortest layover had to be less than whatever the total length of the trip was. So that's why they initialized it using get duration. But there were a couple other things that could have been done in there that worked as well. The downside is that you can't necessarily say that the shortest is 0, because our shortest in the example was 15. And it's hard to find a target number to initialize with, like 100 or 200 or 1000, because we really have no idea what our shortest duration is going to be, our shortest layover is going to be. So but the one thing that we know for a fact is that our shortest layover has to be shorter than whatever the total length of the trip is from start to finish. So that's where that one came from. I hope I answered that question okay. That's a long answer to a short question. I apologize.
It's all right.
Okay. All right. So like I said, I know we're already a couple minutes over time, but I wanted to take some time. So I apologize. I'm going to skip over this second free response question that I had on the mock exam. I want to make sure we talk about the sample open-ended questions. Okay. Now, for the mock exam I put together, and when I put that exam together, it was, wow, 2-3 weeks ago, something to that effect, maybe even a little more than that. Now that we're all kind of quarantined at home, time has lost meaning for me, I feel like. But at the time we put it together, really all we knew about the exam from College Board was that there were going to be 2 questions, and each question was going to have an open-ended question at the end. But we didn't really know anything at all about what that open-ended question would look like. So on the actual mock exam, the open-ended question that you got was nothing more than Rob Schultz's best guess at what that open-ended question might be. We hadn't seen any samples from College Board yet. We didn't really have any guidance. So in my own mind, I kind of envisioned 2 different directions College Board could go with that, and I came up with one question that went one direction and one question that went the other direction. Since then, like I said, May 1st, College Board released a draft of some sample questions based on, for teachers. The questions are based on the free response samples that are in the CED. They added some open-ended questions, and they kind of reformatted those questions a little bit. But for students, the questions were released, the final copy was released on May 4th. And I put a copy of those in the shared folder for the content review session. So you can go out and look at those full questions. What you see on the screen in front of you is one of those sample open-ended questions. So in this case, we have a method that we want to add, get cheapest gizmo by maker. And I know out of context, that doesn't make a lot of sense. So you're going to want to go back and look at the full question so you can see the class definitions and things like that. But the point is, what they're asking us for is not for code. Okay, we're not writing code for this. We're not writing pseudocode. They're asking us to write a description in our own words of how you would change these specific classes, Gizmo and Online Purchase Manager, to support a specific modification. We want to write a method which returns the least expensive gizmo purchased by an individual from a given maker. Okay, so now we have to write a method that's going to meet that requirement. And instead of typing the code to do it, we're going to write a little paragraph that explains how we would do this. And College Board even gives us a little guidance. They say to make sure to include the following in your response. We have to write the method header for the get cheapest gizmo by maker method. We have to identify any new or modified variables or constants or constructors or methods. I mean, anything that we would need to add, we just have to identify it. And they specifically say, do not write the code for this change. And then we have to describe it. So once we've identified the things that we need, we have to describe what they look like. Are they public? Are they private? You know, if I have to add a new instance variable, is it going to be an int or a double or a Boolean? Maybe I need an array or an array list to complete something. So they're asking us to write just a small paragraph saying, hey, this is what I would do. This is what I would need to do it. This is what those things would look like. Okay. And unfortunately, they shared a sample of the question, but they did not share scoring guidelines, which is understandable. I mean, they don't really share the scoring guidelines for any part of the question until after the questions are scored. And they didn't share a sample solution, which again, kind of makes sense. You know, the benefit of having past exams to look at is we can kind of pull past responses to free response questions. But again, this is unprecedented. We've never had an open-ended question before, so there are no sample responses from past questions that we can look at. So, but at least this gives us an idea of what the question might look at and some things that we might be asked to do. So my advice to practice for this is go back and look at some free response questions that maybe you've worked with, and then think about different things you could do with it. If you happen to follow any of the AP Live lessons, we did a week where we talked about arrays, and we did game week. So we looked at, we did array lists. So we looked at the focus of the projects we did that week were card games. And we talked about all the different things you could do to create a Crazy Eights game or an Old Maid game or, you know, Go Fish, and think about different things like that. What method would I have to add to this class that I created that would allow me to do something else? And as long as you can start building those ideas in your head and think about how you would do it, you should be fine on this question. One person described answering an open-ended question as talking to someone on the phone. You know, you have a friend that's a programmer that's working on this project, and in this case, they need to add a method to the get cheapest. They need to add a method called get cheapest gizmo by maker. So they call you on the phone, and you have to describe to them over the phone how you would do it. And that's essentially what you're doing here. You know, first you would have to do this, and then you would have to add this part, and then this is what that would look like. And you're basically just typing what you would tell someone over the phone if they were asking you how you would do this. Okay. There is one other sample free response question here, but again, it's one of the ones that was released by College Board. Like I said, I know we're pushing 10 minutes over time. So the last thing that I want to share, actually the second to last thing I want to share is this. I mean, College Board also shared some things to do as far as preparing for the open-ended questions. I think it's too much nonstop talking. The main thing is just make sure that you're comfortable with what it means when it says to identify or describe. If it says identify, then you're going to provide a name for something specific. So think of it as almost making a list. I mean, you don't need to make a bulleted list in your response, but you would need to identify something. And they give an example, you know, I'm identifying that I need a new variable to represent an item that appears the greatest number of times. If it says describe, then you have to describe it. You know, if I'm talking about, you know, this stapler, I can identify that this is a stapler, but there's a difference between me identifying it and describing it. Describing it is that it fits in my hand, it's red, it has smaller staples than an average stapler. I mean, I'm telling things about it. So in your open-ended response, if it says to to identify something, then you're identifying a list of things you need. If it says to describe, then you have to describe, like I said, what's the return type? What's, what is it public or private? What's the visibility? I mean, what is it going to be used for? How does it interact with other things? I mean, describe it in some way, okay? The last thing I'm going to share is just some important links. Okay, College Board posted this out to a site for all teachers, and I thought it was important for you to have as well, so I'm putting it out here for students and teachers. Just different links that might be beneficial. These are all links to things that we've talked about, the AP checklist, some exam day documents, the AP demo site. Like I said, the checklist and some of the documents that are in here you'll also find in the shared folder for this content review session. There are a couple of videos that College Board released, an exam walkthrough video that would be beneficial for you to watch. The 5 steps for exams, I mean, the things that we talked about, they have a little video where they talk about their take on that. The exam rules, prepping for the exam. So, do yourself a favor, take the time to go out and watch these. I think each one is about 3 or 4 minutes long. I mean, it's not like you're watching 4-hour-long movies. They're very, very short, but the information that's in them is very good. And then the last thing, like I said, the 2020 exam sample questions that were released on May 4th, those are available. I put them in the content review session shared folder. But if by some chance you forget where that is, you can go to the AP coronavirus updates.collegeboard.org. Just go out to AP Central and click the AP coronavirus updates page. And then to find them, you kind of have to dig a little bit. So you would go down to AP Students and click the Information for Students link, go down to Taking the Exams and click the Learn More link. And then from there, look at the online free response exams for each course. It's the very top link on this page. And once you go into the online free response exams, scroll all the way down until you find Math and Computer Science and click the CSA link. And it'll take you to this address, okay? If it's easier to remember the address, just remember the address or take a screenshot. I mean, snap a picture of the screen, however you want to do it. But it's apcoronavirusupdates.collegeboard.org/students/taking-the-exam/computer-science-A. And in addition to the sample questions that were released by College Board, every other piece of information you would want about the AP Computer Science A exam is out there regarding schedules and timing and when you should log in and when you're going to get what information and all that good stuff. So this is kind of the one-stop shop for where you would get the latest information about our specific exam. Wow, a lot of stuff. Sorry about that. I was planning on spending about 50 minutes on all that, and I guess I packed a little more in there than I thought. So I do want to open it up so that if there are any other questions, that you have time to ask questions. And I apologize for keeping you over time.
Thanks, Rob. If any questions continue to come in, we will let you know. I'm going to go ahead and keep my screen here for a second just to do a little wrap up here while we wait.
Okay, so good luck, everybody. Hope everybody does well on the exam. If you're a teacher, I hope your students do well. If you're a student, take a deep breath. You got this. Give it your best shot. And just like I said, make sure you submit when that timer turns red. That's the important part.
Yeah, absolutely. Rob, very appreciative for you taking the time out of your very busy day, very busy past couple months, I think, to talk with us and share some of your tips.
Oh, no problem at all. It was my pleasure.
Contact information for Advanced Kentucky, myself, Monique, Sherry, and Rob are all on that screen. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out via email or Twitter, any of the above. Handouts, like Rob said, are in the content review session folder. That's the bit.ly link. It can also be found at kyap2020.com. Today's recording will be posted there as well. If you are wondering about the mock exams, if you were not familiar with those questions Rob was referencing, those can also be found on kyap2020.com as well. So you can see Rob walk through the scoring in depth for both of those questions he came up with. Next week is the AP exam, like we said, next Friday. So best of luck to everyone. Sherry, Monique, Rob, any other closing thoughts? If not, we'll go ahead and sign off.
Nope, just good luck to everybody. Do well on this exam. You got it.
Good luck, everybody.
All right. So best of luck to everyone, and hopefully we will see you all in the future. Thank you very much.